1, 2, 3, 4. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Yeah, Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour.
Welcome to the Crazy Chester Radio Hour. My guest today is a good friend of mine, Doug Moffet. He's a horn player based in Nashville who often performs and records with the Muscle Shoals Horns. And we met a few years ago when he was playing with the Muscle Shoals Horns. Well, thank you for being my guest today, Doug. Thanks for coming by.
Oh, definitely. It's an honor. I appreciate being asked to do it. Definitely.
Yeah, so let's go back to your beginning. You grew up in Wisconsin.
Yeah, actually, in fourth grade, I started, my dad took me to a local school, and they had teachers there playing instruments, and that was in Evanston and Wilmette, Illinois. And, back in fourth grade, I picked, there's this guy there who's playing a little bit of jazz on the sax, and I dug it, so, I guess back in fourth grade, I decided early on I like saxophone. So, but then I got up into Madison, Wisconsin. We moved up there, and I wasn't really into music until probably seventh and eighth grade. Friends of mine asked me to be in a garage band, and they were real creative young middle schoolers, and we were all writing our own songs and playing some, covers, but we weren't really talented enough to pick off, some of us in the band weren't talented enough to pick off the songs that we wanted to cover, so we had one guy that would help us figure out our parts, but so that just meant we wrote more songs, so that kind of got me inspired, And then, I think it was ninth grade. My parents had always supported music education. They were firm believers in learning an instrument and getting me lessons. So I've always had a lot of different teachers. It's like we lived in a university town in Madison. So there was student teachers, coming in and teaching lessons to young kids. And so I had a different teacher probably every year. They'd come and go and, for various reasons, with schooling and whatnot. But I'd always take, a classical saxophone lesson, and then I'd take a jazz saxophone lesson. And I remember in ninth grade, I went up to a place called Shell Lake Jazz Camp. And it was actually a really good jazz camp. I went there for like 4 years, and it was run by Indiana University people. Teachers would come up to Shell Lake, Wisconsin, and teach there, and they had University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire professors there teaching, and really almost like teaching college age jazz education to high school kids, so ninth grade I was turned on to Lester Young and Coleman Hawkins, and they gave us a discography of saxophone players to listen to, and I just went chronological. Like I started with Lester Young and Coleman Hawkins and ninth grade, probably, and then, got turned on to, in 10th grade, some student teacher who was teaching our jazz band at my high school. He loaned me a copy of Miles Davis' Kind of Blue album. So I took that home and I, picked off a Cannonball Adderley solo and played a John Coltrane solo on alto and transcribed that in 10th grade, And so, really just learning from all those folks in high school really got me to a good advanced point by the time I graduated in high school. My last year I went to Interlochen Arts Academy, and up in Michigan, Interlochen, Michigan, and there's a guy, Fred Hemke, who's a famous classical saxophone teacher from Northwestern University. He'd come up there every 2 weeks to Interlochen and teach lessons. So I'd take a lesson with him and then do the jazz band thing up at Interlochen for my last year in high school. And by the time high school was done, I was pretty well prepared to get on to University of Miami, and I was, had a good education, and I practiced a lot, so I was ready for it. I was serious about it from 8th grade on, really.
Yeah. So as far as horns, did you start out on the alto sax, or how did you move from one to the other?
Yeah, it was alto sax, pretty much, 4th grade until maybe 10th grade. I picked up tenor. I was always into learning how to, learn how to improvise and playing with Ebersol, for my jazz saxophone lessons. So by 10th grade, I was definitely playing Ebersol records, maybe even 9th grade. And transcribing a little bit, and you get into jazz band situation, and if you're into improvisation, then most of the solos are in the saxophone section are written for tenor. So I picked myself up a tenor, and just so I could blow some improv in the jazz band. So yeah, by junior and senior, I was definitely seriously into tenor sax, but played both.
Yeah. So after you graduated high school, you decided to go to University of Miami, and that University of Miami is very much well known as a horn players school. A lot of great horn players have come through that school.
Yeah, definitely.
How was that experience for you in Miami?
I kind of lucked into the University of Miami. A friend of mine who was a trumpet player, we played in a small jazz ensemble, small jazz group, quintet, and then we also played in the bigger jazz band. We were graduating together, and we were both thinking about, going to school somewhere. And Miami at that time was still new. You had North Texas State and then Indiana University and Berkeley College of Music. They were all well known, but University of Miami was brand new to me, and there was actually a couple of Interlochen students that went to University of Miami. Joel McNeely, who's now writing movie scores out in L.A. But my jazz band director would say, well, Joel went down to University of Miami, you should go check it out. So we went down there, checked it out, and I could have gone to either one of those schools, really. They offered me a little bit of money from each one of them. But there's something cool about the University of Miami. It's more contemporary jazz scene. It's just felt. Cool thing about University of Miami, I learned since going there was, the guy who started that program was a guy, Bill Lee. And he's the dad of Will Lee, who plays, famous bass player. And Bill Lee was just always, really appreciative and supporting of jazz as an art form. And so if he was the president or whatever you call it, of the music school, Bill Lee was the head honcho of the music school. He basically, I think, got that program started, and he hired Jerry Coker. Jerry Coker then went on to various other colleges, and I think he retired after working in Knoxville, UT, University of Tennessee. But Jerry Coker wrote Patterns for Jazz, and I was already working out of Patterns for Jazz as a high school kid. And then quickly, I think Jerry was only down there 3-4 years, and then he handed it over to Whit Seidner. And, by the time I went down to Miami in 78, I think, Hiram Bullock and Pat Metheny and Jaco Pastorius were there from 72 to 76. Half of Metheny's band. Dixie Dregs had graduated from there just about 4 or 6 years before I went in 78. So yeah, the word was out about the University of Miami in 78 for sure. But, going down there, I had no idea how many great saxophone players I would learn from down there. I mean, really, seriously, I had a different sax teacher every semester. There's so many good seasoned professional guys coming back for their masters or their doctorates teaching there, let alone 3 sax professors that were full-time there. So they had a plethora of saxophone teachers there to learn from. It was just a great experience. It's a well-run school, well-designed, program. Learned a lot, really equally from the students as I did the teachers. I mean, the students down there have gone on to do great things. Andy Snitzer would be one of them. He's a big session guy in New York. We were there at the same time. Rick Margitzer was there at the same time I was. And he's put out 10 or 15 jazz records, Blue Note. He's living in Paris, France now. And Ed Caillet is a big session player down in Miami. He's a great player, plays with Arturo Sandoval. He was down there at the same time I was. Mario Cruz. I mean, just tons of saxophone players. I remember taking a year off from college just to kind of roam around, hitchhike a little bit and go camp out and I was just, checking out other cities to think about where I might want to end up. I went to San Fran and LA and West Coast and Boston and New York and, wandered around the country. But then I realized, I was learning so much after all that year off and traveling around. I realized, per capita, the amount of great saxophone players down in Miami at that time you couldn't beat it. They probably had 100 different saxophone players in the Miami area and at the school, and a lot of them were world-class players. So I decided to go back to Miami and finish up school there rather than, switch schools, go someplace else. So yeah, I was always a good reader, but it definitely fine-tuned my reading. I played in local Miami Latin bands that really made my appreciation grow for Latin music, playing with the real deal Cuban bass players or Colombian bass players. There's one club I used to play at, or sub in, my roommate played in the band and I would sub in the band. And it was a high dollar Latin club. It's funny, I was on winter break from school and they were doing a program on, the cocaine queen of Miami. And it was on NBC News. I still remember it. I'm going, hey, that's my band. That's the band I play with on TV. And it's then I realized after, subbing in the band that it was owned by the cocaine queen of Miami. I'd always heard that, her boyfriend ran the club and always came in a different Mercedes-Benz every month. But, I knew there was a connection, but it was a real clean, high-dollar club, Nothing funny went on. But it wasn't till I saw it on NBC News that I realized what kind of connections it had, The regular Latin band I played in was like a 11 to 3 o'clock in the morning Latin band off 8th Street where people would get shot in the bathroom, and they'd come out, I'd be out smoking cigarettes outside, and a trombone player would come out to me and say, man, they want you to leave. Somebody just got shot in the bathroom. They don't want anybody around when the cops show up. So it only happened once, but, those are just kind of funny, weird stories of my Miami time. But really, playing Latin music I love Latin music to this day, and it's mathematically, rhythmically complex to read that music. So, it really fine-tuned my reading skills to play Latin music, no doubt, and my rhythm skills as far as just, finding a pocket when the Latin bass player is like never hitting one, I'm just going, it just had a lopey type of funny feel to it for me as a young guy, when the bass player is always kind of just ever so gently anticipating one to make it kind of roll, And so, and I remember one horn player in the horn section said, just don't listen to the bass. Just listen to the cowbell or the claves or, different part of the rhythm section. Don't listen to the bass. It'll throw you off. 'Cause sometimes I would start going with the bass and anticipating when I wasn't supposed to, just learning,
Yeah.
as a college kid. But it was a great learning experience for sure.
So after you graduated, what were some of your early gigs, and what eventually led you up here to Nashville?
Well, I had a fellow friend and classmate. He was a couple years older. His name was Tim Smith. He's a bass player, and he was living in Nashville, kind of living in L.A., and then mainly going to living in Nashville. He was playing with Paul McCartney's drummer of Wings, the Wings band drummer, Joe English.
Yeah.
And so Tim was playing with Joe English, and Tim was a smooth talking type of guy. He's always excited about the music, and so he talked Joe into letting him help produce the horn section that Joe wanted to put on. And so Tim Smith got me and a couple of his friends from Indiana University to do some horns on Joe English album, and also a guy named Judson Spence, who at that time was just putting out his first contemporary Christian album. And later Judson went on to do a Pop 40 album that I played on. We went to Japan with Judson and did New Orleans during Mardi Gras and MTV TV show. That was a cool experience, but really it was Tim Smith that turned me on to Nashville. Nashville wasn't on my radar at all. I knew nothing about Nashville. Absolutely nothing. I was a jazz improvising type of guy, but really when it comes down to it, I just like playing music, and so no matter what kind of music I'm playing, I like playing. So it really doesn't have to be any particular type of music. I like playing any type of music. Whether I go out and buy it, I might not go out and buy it, but I like playing it. So, I came to Nashville and played on these two albums. I'm going, yeah, it's a cool place, I like it. It's green. It's got trees, It's not like going to New York City or L.A., It's got a, relatively city feel. It's kind of a mid-time, it almost felt like a town, didn't really have a big city feel. It wasn't until the 2000s when it really started growing and becoming a real city. It's like, I remember, waiting 25 years for this town to grow up into a city. And when it finally did, and all the traffic, cars and driving around, all the bad traffic came with it, I finally grew up into a city, and now I want to move away because too much traffic, No, I don't really want to move away. I'm too established, but, it's funny. I waited so long for it to become city, and it finally did, But yeah, those two projects, and I thought, okay, well, I'll try and check out Nashville. I didn't think I was good enough to really make it in New York. And, I was used to hearing Rick Margetza play, and I didn't think I could compete with Rick Margetza. So I'm sure there's 10 other guys who sounded like Rick Margetza in New York, In LA, I wasn't all that excited about. I would have enjoyed going there and playing the music there for sure. And I think I could have made a living in either one of those cities, but I have no regrets coming to Nashville. It's treated me well, and it's got a vibrant music scene that keeps on growing. So and getting a chance to play with the Muscle Shoals guys, that was a neat thing. I remember I don't know, it was around '93. And I'd already been I first met Charles Rose on an Opryland gig. I was working Opryland like 6 days a week, 5 shows a day. And so Charles came in and subbed for the trombone chair. I didn't know who he was, I didn't really know too much about Muscle Shoals at all back in '84, I got here in Nashville in '83, so yeah, I probably met Charles in, I don't know, 86, 87, 80. Actually, it might have been later than that. Not sure when I know it was probably late 80s, early 90s. Charles had made a go of living in Nashville a couple of years. And he subbed an Opryland gig, and I just automatically knew he was a great player, great intonation, And because he's sitting right behind me, and I know the music so well. Those Opryland shows, we'd play them 5 shows a day for 6 days a week. I mean, you know, I could read a book and play the show. In fact, I played the show better when I was reading a book, because then I wasn't distracted by other stuff. I was just reading my book and playing the part, you know. And I knew everybody's part, you know, pretty much. You know, I knew if it was sounding good. And, you know, Charles sounded, for a guy to come in and sub the show, sight reading, just, you know. So I went up to Charles and said, hey, sound great back there. I'm Doug, you know. And then my fellow trumpet playing friend Jim Williamson said, yeah, that's Charles Rose. He's the guy that works down Muscle Shoals, you know. I've told you about him. I'm going, yeah, I've heard about y'all. You know, and then I started doing a couple sessions with Charles, you know. Harvey would either be going out with, he couldn't make it, or mainly it was probably at that time Jim Horn was too busy, and so I'd be subbing for Jim Horn. And then Harvey sometimes on some summer gigs would go with Lyle when he only had one sax and it wasn't a horn section. So then I'd sub in Muscle Shoals Horn projects, you know, recording projects for either Harvey when he was out in the summertime or Jim when he was out touring with, or too busy to do it. So, you know, but 93 is when Jim Horn and I were doing a session in Nashville. There's 3 saxophones. There's Jim Horn, Jim Hoke, and I. And Horn said, hey, Doug, you know, Muscle Shoals guys got a tour of Europe. I can't do it. You want to do it? And it was kind of a last-minute thing, like within 2 weeks or something of leaving, or 3 weeks, I don't know. And so I said, sure, I'll go do it. I've never been to Europe. I'd like to go to Europe. So, you know, in 93, I went to Europe, and they had already made the luggage bag tags with Jim Horn's name on it. So it was definitely kind of a last-minute thing. And so I was, you know, had Jim Horn's luggage bag tags on all my bags that were going around Europe, you know. But, you know, that's where I got to know the rhythm section, Muscle Shoals rhythm section, all those guys, you know, going out on the road with them for 3 weeks to a month, you know. And you know, even though I'd been doing a little bit of recording down there, it was probably mostly horn section overdub type stuff. You know, not really getting to know the guys all that much. And then after that tour, I'd come back, and we were, back in the 90s, they were still recording live band stuff with horns, you know, down in Muscle Shoals for Malaco projects, blues projects. And so I got to know those guys better in the 90s doing that. So, you know, that's one thing that's cool about Muscle Shoals and working with those guys, is that, you know, it's a down home feeling and vibe. They really do care about the music down there. And it's like we'll be doing horn section recordings, overdubs, and some of the, you know, like Will McFarlane and David Hood show up just to say hey, you know, to the horn section overdub. They're not even working that day, but they'd come in and say hi. They want to hear what the project was sounding like and what it sounded like with horns, you know. They're excited to hear, you know, what it was going to sound like with horns. So, you know, it took me a while to figure out that's what they were doing. I just thought they were hanging out. They knew the star or the producer, and they were just, you know, but no, they were coming by to say hi and were curious about the project. And I think that comes out in the Muscle Shoals sound of the music, you know, where, you know, they really got some mojo going on, and it gets to tape, you know. They really love the stuff that they're doing and the projects that they get into, and they care about it enough to show up, check out the horn section as they record, you know. So you don't ever see that really in Nashville. I don't think I've ever seen that in Nashville, where the rhythm guys would come back during a horn overdub and come check out what it's going to sound like. I'm not sure, Nashville being a bigger city, whether they're really invited to come back and check us out, but, you know, that's one cool thing I really like about working with Muscle Shoals. You know, it's just, I think that vibe gets to tape, you know. And after hearing David Hood's interview the other day with Chester Records and Charles Rose's interview with Chester Records, it was kind of like, man, I've been working with these guys 25, 30 years now, and it's like pretty much everything David said in his interview was news to me. I mean, that was cool. I liked hearing all those old stories. Charles, since I've worked with him more in overdub horn section situations, I'd probably heard half the stories, but maybe not as much detail. So it's kind of like I enjoyed listening to Charles Rowe's interview as well before I came here to do this. I'm always learning, the past of the Muscle Shoals scene. It's like every time I go down there, I learn something new.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the reasons why I started the podcast, because I'm around those guys a lot and they just break out these stories, and I'm like, these stories are so entertaining. I would like to find a way to share those a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely.
And when I interviewed David, I made an effort to actually not necessarily ask him just the most obvious questions, because I know he had to answer those plenty of times before. So I'm glad that he picked up on that, because that was certainly an intention there, to have him tell a few tales that have not necessarily been as covered.
I've heard some of those tales, but probably not as many as I heard on the interview the other day. I mean, I was like, holy cow! It was eye-opening to me. It was neat hearing all that stuff and hearing about the history more.
Yeah.
I mean, every occasionally I would ask Charles, well, what was it like flying on the plane with Elton John? And he wouldn't really get into it. He just said, it's just like a plane. Get on the plane, go. We had our own plane. That was cool.
Yeah.
Something like that,
So, talking about Charles, how you talked a little bit about his, playing, but how do you perceive him as an arranger and a horn section leader? Because usually when it's a Muscle Shoals horn session, it's his chart and it's his direction. How is that?
Oh, being a horn player, you really get put into a wide variety of situations. I mean, all types of music, all types of gigs, under wide variety of bosses and arrangers. I've been really fortunate to play with so many great players and so many great horn arrangers, and Charles Rose is one of those great horn arrangers. I mean, he just brings something that's a classic sound to that type of music. He makes the horn lines. I always tell him, that fits the music like a glove. Just you put that horn glove on the song, and it just fits naturally. And his ears are just amazing. He hears everything. I mean, he's got great ears. I always joke around when we're doing some Muscle Shoals Horns gigs, and Charles can't make it, but he contracts us, and we're playing his charts. I tell the guys, hey, man, even though Charles is not here, he's going to hear if you don't play that short note that's marked. Because, he hears it. He doesn't let anything slide either, So, Charles Rose, a whole bunch of different arrangers in Nashville. I get it. Chris McDonald be one, Lloyd Berry be another. Just got a chance to work with Rob Munsey, who did the Steely Dan horn charts. That was a live rhythm thing the other day for Elliot Shiner, which is way cool. Rob Munsey and Elliot Shiner together. I mean, gee, that was cool. Tim Akers, he's a great horn arranger. So yeah, when I heard David Hood's interview the other day about how, there's a point where Fame Music wanted their rhythm section to be exclusive, I could really relate to that story because, as a horn player, you're always the last one to be hired, first one to be fired. It's an added expense to the band and the project. So sometimes they can afford horns, most times they can't. They might want them, but they can't. They really don't want to spend the money on it. So the exclusive factor really limits your possibility as a freelance, self-employed musician to make money. So if people are digging on what you're doing, you want to be able to work with as many people as you can. And fortunately, I've been able to do that and work with other horn players and great musicians that are able to do the same thing. But it's always a constant struggle being self-employed and it goes up and down every year, you know. You know, it's for all of us, really. I mean, you know, some guys will have longer runs than others. But, you know, to be able to, you know, play with so many different situations and how Charles Rose brings that certain sound to the song is always, I just try and open up an ear and check out what he's doing and how he does it. Because, you know, every time I learn something, you know, slowly but surely I learn something. So that's the way I look at it, you know, just try and never think you're too good, you know. You always try and learn something, you know, always try and get better. I remember, you know, after a rehearsal one time, David Hood sounded good, and I said, "Hey, man, sound good, David?" And he said, "Yeah, I hope I can do it again tonight on the gig." You know, that was just a perfect example of a musician perfectionist always wanting to sound good and always wanting to. And you never know when you're going to mess up, and so you want to make sure you don't mess up. You want to try and get better, you know. And you know, when David in the interview was talking about learning a different style of music, I feel like I'm still learning blues and R&B music, even still at this stage. And you know, to play a solo on a blues, I mean, come from my jazz background, learning the blues style is still evolving. You know, I've gotten better at it, yeah, but you know, I still want to be as good as the greats, you know, eventually.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about doing your own record?
Oh, I've thought about it through the years, for sure. Always, you know, every year think about it. But then as the music business has evolved from LPs to cassettes to CDs to digital downloads, you know, and iTunes and you know, the music business has changed financially for the record companies, you know, and the artists. So, and the royalties that derive from radio airplay, you know. So, yes, I still want to put out an album, you know, but I guess part of it is, you know, I'm thinking I'm just going to have to do it all myself and sell it online by myself or something, you know, to make any kind of money. I'm not sure I'm ready to go out and tour with a project, you know. I still have to, you know, make money doing what I do. So, you know, being a freelance saxophone player, you just gotta, I guess I've, you know, kind of been kept a little bit too busy to get into my own project. And in certain ways, you know, for some years, I've been fortunate enough to have been busy enough to, you know, that's kept me occupied. You know, so unfortunately, you know, I've never put out my own solo project. Maybe one of these days. I still got it in there somewhere. I'm still thinking that those thoughts are, and ideas and musical ideas are still going through my head. You know, being such a fan of improvisation, you know, and playing solos, you know, I always got musical ideas running through my head. So I'm going, I need to write that down, you know. And sometimes I do. Sometimes I just record it, bits and pieces here and there.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier with, you know, mainly having a jazz background, you know, going through school and all that, and here being part of a lot of sessions that are more, you know, pop, R&B, country, rock, but you still got to do the jazz thing often. And one of your, you know, employers or collaborators has been Larry Carlton. How did that connection come about?
You know, Larry, what a legend. Anytime you get to work and record with Larry, it's like you're one removed from almost everybody in the industry. I mean, from Quincy Jones to anybody, you know. You know, it was an amazing experience. Cool thing about Larry, you know, is he always wanted to do a blues project with horns. He just always wanted to do that, you know. And so he finally got a chance to do that. And fortunately, you know, he hired a horn section from Nashville. I think it was different guys on the album. One of the guys was the same. Marked out that was the same, I believe. But I think different guys played that album, the blues album that he did. But we went out and toured with him for that project, and so he took us all over the world. I mean, Japan. I don't know. I've been Japan 5 times with Larry, Thailand twice, South Korea, all over Europe. So yeah, it was interesting to see what the rest of the world thought about, Larry's music and jazz in general. Because with that size band, 4 guys in the band and 4 guys in the horn section, I was playing baritone sax at that time. I mean, that's an expensive band to fly around and put up in hotels, and so we were kind of delegated mainly to festivals. And so that was cool, because then you got to see a whole bunch of other musicians and hear a bunch of music, at all these different festivals. Especially in the United States, I think we only played 2 clubs in the United States. The rest were festivals. But even in Europe, it was mainly festivals, and Thailand, it was festivals. South Korea was festivals. In Japan, Blue Note clubs could afford to hire the band for like 5 days. So yeah, hearing Larry play every night for those 2 years and doing another album. One of those albums got nominated for a Grammy for rock instrumental. But I think it was Firewire, I think is the name of the album. But, Larry, backstage, he would constantly be listening on the internet to LA jazz radio stations or John Coltrane. And he'd play all these wicked chords backstage when he was warming up. It sounded like Bill Evans. The voicings he was playing on guitar is like, it was just kind of totally different than what you heard on stage. Not totally. I mean, he'd throw that out there on stage sometimes. But he'd get off on a chord pattern, just trying to come up with something new, and his fingers would go places probably that he wasn't even used to going, He'd be trying to figure out something new, And even though he didn't like generally players who played a lot of notes, or played too fast and leave enough space, it wasn't his style. He's more soulful. He would still hear that soul in Coltrane, and he'd listen to Coltrane a lot. It almost seems like every time I went back to his dressing room, it was either L.A. jazz station or Coltrane, So it was interesting, to see that side of Larry. But, yeah, it was a cool experience, great horn section, so it was neat.
Yeah. Did you play Eric Clapton's Crossroads festivals with him?
Yeah, we did the Crossroads, Eric Clapton Crossroads in Dallas with Larry. And then I did the Crossroads show in Chicago with Vince Gill. And working with Vince Gill, it was the same horn section. Sapphire Blue Horns was the name. Larry was so committed to the horn section, he actually copyrighted Sapphire Blue Horns. That's kind of an honor for Larry to do that. But I think it was more of business reasons, but still kind of cool. So, we brought the Sapphire Blues. It was Barry Green, Mark Douth, and Mike Haynes and I out on the... Mark got us that gig with Vince Gill, and so we went straight from touring with Larry Carlton for a year, 2 years, to a year and a half, to touring with Vince Gill for a year and a half to 2 years. And, it was going to Eric Clapton Crossroads gigs. That was just something way cool. I mean, any great guitar player that's ever existed was like playing on those things. I mean, you walk around backstage and you don't know where to look first. I mean, there's so many famous people walking around, So as a musician, a fan of other musicians, I was, everybody was all just kind of awestruck with everybody who was hanging out and being there. And it's an amazing thing that, what Eric has done for the benefit, it's all kind of a benefit, but it's a production, so everybody gets paid. Maybe the artists don't get paid, I don't really know. But, their bands get paid, but it's just a good thing, people still tell me, yeah, I just saw you on TV the other day at the Eric Clapton thing. You know, they rerun that thing forever and a day, you know, obviously for the benefit reasons, you know. But yeah, that was way cool.
When I researched doing this podcast, something I didn't know, but somebody else you performed with was Randy Newman, and I love Randy Newman.
Oh, yeah.
What kind of gig was that?
Oh, that was just Nashville Symphony Pops gig. I was playing in the saxophone section. And, you know, why I finally remember that and bothered to put that on a resume is just, you know, Randy Newman himself. I mean, he's one of two guys I've bothered to really bug, you know, to ask for an autograph. I mean, I've played with a lot of famous people, and I usually see them have to sign a lot of autographs, and I don't want to bug them anymore for to sign another autograph for their band member, you know, so I just don't really bother to bug them, you know. But with Randy Newman, you know, he's one of the few composers that's made me laugh and cry, you know, and I just was blown away by his songwriting, you know. And so I said, yeah, put that down when you're signing the autograph. Thanks, you know, for laughing and crying. I can't remember what it said, but I said, put that in there. He came up with a cute thing, you know, at the end, kind of to laugh it off, you know. I wish I could remember what he said, something. I hope I didn't mess you up too bad or something like that. And then the other guy was Pat Metheny. I was in an airport, you know, and chatted him down and, you know, asked him for an autograph just because I'm such a big Pat Metheny fan. My wife, Mary, is a huge Pat Metheny fan, you know, so it's kind of like I made Pat make it out to my wife, Mary, and that kind of won her over. I think we were dating at the time, and when I gave her that autograph, you know, it just flipped her out. It's probably why she married me. It's because I got her a Pat Metheny autograph.
Yeah, well, that was a good move then.
Yeah. You know, speaking of autographs, you know, doing a Lynyrd Skynyrd 20 album, those guys are music fans. Lynyrd Skynyrd guys, everybody in the band, you know, they're just fans of the musicians who record the music. They came up to the horn section, you know, when we were doing the overdub, and they asked us all for autographs. And you know, I was the only one who said, well, if you're going to ask for my autograph, I'm going to ask for your autograph. So, you know, I got 3 autographs sitting in a pile somewhere. Hadn't put them up on the wall yet, but one of these days I might get around to it. Yeah.
So you've also been part of many memorable recording sessions. I know one that sticks out, and that happened fairly recently, early this year, was when you, as part of the Muscle Shoals Horns, played for Paul McCartney.
Oh yeah, you know what musician is not a fan of Paul McCartney? I mean, you know, all the guys in the horn section were, you know, trying not to freak out too much before we went, you know, because, you know, shoot, I remember that's one of my first musical memories as a kid, and I, you know, probably 4th grade, is going downstairs before everybody woke up and putting, you know, Beatles records on the player and listening to both sides, you know. That's my first musically memory almost. So yeah, I got a funny story on the, you know, I would say about 1/3 of it was sung to us by Paul, you know, through the control room. He'd sing us a line through the mic line, and we'd pick it off. Or 1/3 of it was we'd have to pick off an existing guitar line that was on the tracks already, and then 1/3 of it was written out. So we did 6 songs, and 3 songs made the album. And I hope one of these days, you know, who knows, they might release the other 3 eventually. So I'd like to hear what they sounded like. But yeah, you know, a funny story was that, you know, after about the 3rd song, we were kind of taking a break, and Paul came out of the control room. He came up, you know, outside to the horn studio room, and he was just hanging out, you know, talking, getting to know each other, you know, really. He did that at the beginning of the day, but then he went back in the control room. So in the middle of the day, he came out and talked to us, and we were just, you know, listening to him talk basically, and just saying hi. And he said, you know, I love having horns, and, you know, did you realize that my first instrument was trumpet? And I didn't realize that. I think maybe some of the other guys did. But he said, yeah, but I got to a point where I couldn't sing and play trumpet. So I asked my dad as a kid, if I could go trade in my trumpet at the pawn store, give me a guitar so I could sing and play guitar at the same time. And we all thought, well, that was a good idea, Paul. Switching over to guitar was a good idea.
Worked out for him.
Yeah, it worked out for him. So we're all laughing about that. And then Steve Herman, who was playing trumpet, he said, yeah, Paul was asking about his trumpets and just looking at all the horns we lined up. Because Charles, since he wasn't writing the charts, they asked him not to write anything. They just wanted to do it by head charts. Charles didn't know what to expect, so he told everybody involved to just bring pretty much everything they owned. So our cartage bills to get out to L.A. were high, I mean, Tom Bones Malone was bringing trumpets and trombones and saxophones and flutes, and I was bringing, clarinet and flute, and alto and soprano and tenor, and Jim Hoke was bringing baritone and tenor, and clarinet, and he brought his harmonicas. And then, Steve had his trumpet and his cornet and his flugel. And so Paul went up to Steve and said, is that a cornet? He said, yeah, that cornet I got from a guitar player, played with Delbert McClinton, and his dad, that was his dad's cornet, and his dad played with Paul Whiteman. And Paul McCartney freaked out when he heard that. He said, that was my dad's favorite band. Paul Whiteman Orchestra was my dad's favorite band. And so he picked up Steve Herman's cornet, and, you could tell he hadn't played trumpet in at least a decade, who knows? I mean, he's multi-instrumentalist himself, but I doubt if he picks up a trumpet. And so he started playing about 8 bars of Saints, and just kind of trying to remember in the fingerings, but most of it was just his chops pushing the note through, barely squeaking out Saints on the cornet, But I just, we all had a good laugh when we heard him, squeak out some Saints on the cornet. But it was just kind of cool to see Paul, excited about, an old Paul Whiteman orchestra trumpet player's trumpet, or cornet, I should say, and it kind of made me wonder I wonder if that's how he got his name. His dad was a fan of Paul Whiteman. Maybe that's why he named Paul. So who knows? I don't know that. He didn't say that, but it definitely made me wonder about that.
Yeah, that's a great story too.
Yeah, it was fun gig.
And we were almost at the end of our interview, but you are on another record that's now just out, Willie Nelson's My Way album.
That was fun. That was Chris McDonald arrangement. The keyboard player played with Lyle Lovett.
Yeah.
Matt
Rawlings.
Matt Rawlings. He was producing and helping Chris a little bit with horn arrangements. Willie wasn't there that day, but it was cool. It was big band stuff, and Willie did it. I have heard the album, and Willie sounds great on that album. I mean, he really brings a raw, authentic quality to those old jazz standards. It's really unique. I mean, I think it's a cool sounding album. So, I'm proud to have done that this year, So between Paul, Willie, and did a Garth Brooks project this year, so, it's 2018 has been an up year, so it's been good for work, so I can't complain. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and thanks again for spending these past hour with me here and talking about your life and music. I sure appreciate that.
Oh, definitely. I kind of started talking too much. I didn't even let you ask a question. I'm amazed I talk that much. I don't know how that happened. Normally that doesn't happen at all. Normally I don't say anything at a session.
Well, I like when that happens because to me it's about your story and not about me. So the more you talk, the better for the program.
I kind of got on a roll after listening to David Hood's interview and Charles Rose's interview. It made me think a little bit about it, so I got a roll on, I guess.
Well, anyway, I wish you all the best, and I hope we'll get to do a lot of sessions and projects together in the future.
Definitely, Andreas, and cheers to Chester Records. I hope it does well. I want to help you out as much as I can. Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe you have to get that Doug Moffet record off the ground one of these days.
Yeah, well, there you go. All right. Sounds good to me.
This was the 40th episode of the Crazy Chester Radio Hour. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to subscribe to the Crazy Chester Radio Hour podcast on iTunes, or check it out on YouTube, TuneIn, Stitcher, or SoundCloud. That's it for today. I'll see you next week.